Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for all of your responses last time, and I thought it went pretty well, so we're going to make another one. 3 more changes that Slay the Spire 2 needs. First off, let's start with the dowsing rod. What's the issue with the dowsing rod? Dowsing rod gives you a quest, and when you have the quest, it's hard to get good value out of Act 1 because a quest is in your deck for most, if not all, of the act. If you route for question marks in Act 1, you're going to be getting less value out of Act 1, and it'll put you in a poor position for the Act 3 bosses. When you avoid elites, you're not only losing a relic, you're also getting less gold in the act. Elites have increased potion chance, and they have rarer cards. So oftentimes the downside of dodging an elite, taking less elites in an act, is not just the relics you're losing. You're losing quite a bit more value when you dodge elites. So what would I do to fix the dowsing rod? I think there are a few options. I think a couple of the things you could do with the dowsing rod is you could make the payoff earlier. If you reduce the number of question marks you have to go through with the dowsing rod, you get the payoff earlier. You guarantee that you get abundance before the Act 1 elite. And all in all, you don't even have to take as safe of an Act 1. I think depending on things, I think 4 is pretty reasonable. I've seen a lot of people suggest 3. I think I'd probably take a more moderate buff early on and then go from there. I think this is a pretty common sentiment that a lot of people have had, and I think this is a simple change that is pretty elegant. Some other things we could do, though, because I think this is interesting. You could buff abundance. I think an abundance that doesn't exhaust would feel very strong. I think it would be worth taking dowsing through the Act 1 elite. And kind of for like a third option, you could do something to mitigate the downside. So giving dowsing something like ethereal makes it feel closer to a clumsy instead of an injury, and thus is less punishing to have into your deck for the entire act. I think they're less likely to do something like this solution because so far every single quest has had kind of the same identity where they are copy and paste an injury, and I don't think they're going to change their design philosophy with quests off of like one single card. I could be wrong, but I think the simplest solution is probably the best in just reducing the number of rooms before abundance transforms, or before dowsing transforms. Now for the second change I'd like to see. Hyperbeam. In Slay the Spire 1, the downsides of Hyperbeam were much more easy to offset. Hyperbeam did less damage in Slay the Spire 1, and you still lost the same focus. But you could mitigate losing focus by having Artifact. There was a relic that gave you Artifact. You had a rare card on defect that gave you Artifact. There was a colorless card that gave you Artifact. So there were a lot of ways to gain Artifact. In addition to this, Defrag was at uncommon rarity, and Biased Cognition was also a rare card instead of an ancient card. So it was easier to get focus, and it was easier to mitigate the downside of Hyperbeam by having Artifact. So for Slay the Spire 2, Artifact no longer exists, and what they've been doing to compensate is increasing the damage. And I think you can only increase the damage so much on a card and still have it be reasonable. I think one of the issues is that every time they buff Hyperbeam, they're basically buffing Splash, and that's not bad. Like, Splash is a colorless card, I love it, and you're not that likely to get Hyperbeam anyways, but it's kind of something to keep in mind. I don't really take this on defect, but you could change the downside. One of defect's synergy packages is status effects. In Slay the Spire 1, Ironclad had a rare card called Immolate. We could make Hyperbeam look almost identical to Immolate. Um, but I think one of my gripes with just making Hyperbeam copy paste Immolate is I kind of like the bigger number on Hyperbeam. Even in Slay the Spire 1, Hyperbeam, I think upgraded, still hit for like 34. And I think 34 is a nice number for like Scrolls of Biting in Act 3. It's also a much nicer number for like Decimillipede. So this doesn't need to stay at 38, but I would still like to see a lot of the bigger number on Hyperbeam. My proposed solution would be to have Hyperbeam put a Void on top of the deck. I think this is particularly interesting because it has some synergy with the defects package, but it's also a pretty sizable downside to Hyperbeam. It basically costs 3 because you're going to lose an energy and a card next turn because you're drawing Void. Because the defect has the status effect package, I think you can sometimes mitigate it, but because it's on top of your deck, the downside is both felt immediate and is a little bit harder to mitigate, which I think it kind of feels like Pokemon Hyper Beam, if anybody's a fan, and I kind of like that design space for it. The final change I'd like to talk about is the 2 curses on Distinguished Cape or Sere Talon. Distinguished Cape used to just lose you max HP, and by the nature of Distinguished Cape, it helped mitigate losing more HP. It helped mitigate the downside of lower max HP because Intangible is just a very strong defensive tool for you. And now it gives 2 random curses. So the random curses are both bad for Bing Bong, and also like duping your deck. So like these are kind of things that if you had a bunch of apparitions that you'd kind of be very interested in having. So like if you have Bing Bong and you were normally looking at apparitions, you'd be like, oh my god, Bing Bong value. But now with 2 random curses, you're like 4 random curses. And I don't know if I'm ever excited to see 4 random curses. That's just kind of insane. But the curses themselves are also a really big downside. It's very hard to remove 2 curses. You'd have to see 2 shops. If you've already removed a card, your removals are already higher. So they go from being 100 to 150 to 200. So if you have to do a 150 and a 200 remove to remove 2 curses, that's pretty bad. Also, the curses are very bad for your deck when you're involved with the mirror. If you ever get the mirror, normally if you have apparitions in your deck, you'd be like, wow, a mirror's really exciting to me. But, do you want to have 8 curses? Do you want 12 curses with Bing Bong and mirror? I don't know. That's a lot of curses. And in a way, I understand their thought process. It's a very elegant solution to nerf one of the funnest and strongest synergies of just being able to get a bunch of very powerful cards into your deck. But I kind of feel like it's overly punishing. Even if you just think of Distinguished Cape on its own, 2 curses is a massive downside. In my opinion, 2 curses as a downside to an ancient bonus is extremely punishing. So I think we could consider a lot of different options for downsides instead of 2 curses. There's the obvious 1 random curse instead, and that's just like a simple solution, right? If you want to have a random curse as a downside to Vaku's Ancient Pool, this is just the simplest buff from going from 2 curses to 1 curse. Other options that I would kind of prefer over 2 curses is if you think about how much gold it would cost you to remove 2 curses, if you've already done 1 removal in Act 2 or Act 1, removal costs 150, and then your second removal costs 200 gold. Honestly, if it's going to cost you 350 gold already to remove 2 curses, Fucking take it all, bro. I'm poor, but you know, at least I don't have two curses for the first three fights of Act 3. Um, I think losing 31 max HP, I think a lot of people are going to see 31 and they're going to be like, wow, that's a very big number. But I think 31 is kind of an elegant number. This, on a lot of characters, is going to be a very sizable chunk. Very few characters are going to have a lot of HP after losing 31. So they have to be very conservative with taking Distinguished Cape, unless they've already had their max HP increased from like an early chosen cheese or something like that. I think 31 is also an elegant number in the game because this is the fruit from Nono Upe. So I think I kind of like 31 as a number. And then there's the pale downside that your next treasure chest is empty. That's quite a bit of value, but when you compare it to two curses, like a relic's probably worth 200 gold, and then the gold in the chest is like 50 gold. So it's like 250 gold for two curses is probably pretty reasonable. Like if you just consider the gold value of it. I think two curses is just a very extreme downside. And it also bricks up all the synergies of Distinguished Cape being, you know, if you've got a Bing Bong, which I think is really fun. I think the Bing Bong synergy of Distinguished Cape is really fun. And I also think duping your deck with Distinguished Cape is also really fun. So I think just changing the downside of Distinguished Cape a little bit, I think would be really fun. I think because Sarah Talon used to be absolutely terrible. Like if you think of how bad Sarah Talon was with two random curses, they've removed the two random curses in the new beta branch patch. Sarah Talon's actually pickable. I think they're maybe not realizing how bad two curses is as a downside to ancient bonuses. Anyway, once again, thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I wrong with some of these changes? What would you change? Do you think two curses is too extreme for Distinguished Cape? I do think it is kind of an elegant solution, but I just think it's overly punishing. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and thank you for watching.